Hello, everyone. I wanted to thank both our panelists and our audience for taking the time to discuss and learn about the critical issues of domestic and relational violence today. I also wanted to thank my fantastic team for all of their hard work in making this happen. My name is Anam Faruqi. I'm the event producer and a current master's candidate at USC, studying the intersection of entertainment and social impact. Domestic violence is a topic which is very close to my heart, and in 2020, I received my 40-hour domestic violence advocacy certification, allowing me to work directly with survivors in the state of California. In line with our discussion of abuse, I want to acknowledge the abuses faced by the Native American people that being in Los Angeles, I'm currently Zooming from the original home of the Tonga people. And before we begin, I'd also like to note that we will be talking at length about domestic, relational, and sexual violence. So if our audience needs to step away or take a break at any time, please feel free to do so. Okay, so let's jump right in. I will be the event moderator today, but I'm so excited to get to know our panelists. I would like each of you to introduce yourself, your title and organization, and why you chose to work in this field. Let's start off with Veronica from Laura's House.
Hello, as she said, my name is Veronica Stevens, and I am the manager for the Education and Outreach Department at Laura's House. We are a domestic violence agency in Orange County. I actually got into this field because prior I was working in the human trafficking space in both the survivors, so aftercare as well as prevention. That was predominantly international. And so when we decided to open up a home here in the States, I did see the intersectionality between domestic violence and human trafficking, and I'm all about prevention. And so I crossed over to the domestic violence space about 5 years ago, and we are actively getting into middle schools, high schools, and universities, talking about healthy relationships and some of the warning indicators of potentially dangerous dating relationships, and of course the adult population as well, bringing awareness and prevention to them through governmental agencies, non-governmental agencies, as well as other nonprofit agencies, and training staff on what to look for in the population they serve, and helping their client support services through our education, and if necessary, our direct client services as well.
Thank you, Veronica. So excited to have you. Let's go with Regina next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Regina Wei, and I'm a couples and family therapist in private practice in Washington State. I'm on the ancestral lands of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. I am pursuing certification in sex therapy as well. I'm second generation Chinese American, which means I was born and raised here. And my clinical experience working with survivors of interpersonal violence or intimate partner violence started with a year-long internship at Peace Over Violence, which is an organization that serves survivors of IPV. I chose to work in this field because I've always been very, very interested in helping people heal. And a few other tools I have in my toolbox are yoga and meditation and energy healing.
Thank you so much. Derek, if you want to go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Derek Wu, and I'm currently the sexual violence specialist at USC RSVP, Relationship and Sexual Violence Prevention. Previous to this, I was over at UCLA also doing sexual violence prevention, and I'm currently in a PhD program for education for social justice. I really got into this when I was in college. I was really wanting to get more involved in social justice work. My passion really lies within race and racism. I was an Asian American Studies major in college, so I'm really in tune with concepts regarding like systems of oppression and that people of color face, especially women of color, right? So for me, sexual violence was an area where I saw race and racism play a large part of survivors receiving care. And so that is naturally the area that I was kind of drawn to. And so now I work at RSVP doing sexual violence prevention work and working with the communities at USC.
Thank you, Derek. And finally, the wonderful Sophie, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I am the founder and CEO of Apathic Ridge, which is a grassroots organization whose mission is to inspire, celebrate, and kind of keep the conversation going about domestic violence and sexual violence year round, not just kind of event based, and having that conversation be kind of a hot topic only after something traumatic happens within a community. I'm a current undergrad junior at USC, so I've been working with the Greek life community, mainly kind of focusing on education within IFC and kind of sort of like debunking some like myths about like Greek life, and also really trying to like educate members who aren't from California and are part of like the Greek life system about our consent laws and how like heavy sexual assault is taken in the state of California and the importance of consent.
Incredible. We are so lucky to have each and every one of you here with us today. So let's jump right in to talk about what were your initial thoughts about this film? Would you say it's an effective PSA? What do you think it does well? And where do you think it could be better? If we can, let's start with Derek.
Yeah, I think the film needs a lot of context, right? So as a prevention educator, I come from a trauma-informed lens, right? So I personally wouldn't ever use like shock methods or reactionary pieces like this, because I recognize that it could trigger survivors, right? However, I do think it's important to recognize that where this PSA is made and distributed, right? This PSA is in Mandarin, it's in Chinese, right? It's made for Chinese people in China. I'm Chinese, right? And I think of myself as pretty understanding of Chinese people. So I understand that reactionary pieces like this are forms of resistance, right? And there isn't a lot of forms of resistance in China, right? That's just how the government works, right? And so I think that's something that is really important to recognize, right? And I think that reactionary prevention education is also used in the US as well. But I think that it's really important to think about survivors and survivors' emotions and triggers. And so while I think that this PSA is a really great, representation, right, of what should be done in China and other like places, I do think that it could, use a trigger warning. I do think that it could be more trauma informed, right, and highlighting survivors' experiences. But I do think that this film is such a great representation of resistance within China, and yeah.
Those are great points. And if any other panelists want to jump in and share what they thought, welcome that.
I'll chime in. I appreciate Derek's point of view 1000%. I will say that for me personally, I thought it was incredibly provocative. I actually really thought that the impact was pretty doggone powerful. As an educator, I will say that there's kind of two streams of thought that I typically, a lens I look out from. It is either one, there are some people that are just motivated positively. What is the reward for staying within the guidelines of healthy, robust relationships? And that will be their motivator and is enough. And then there are some that honestly see it through a different lens and they need kind of that provocative, shocking element to get them to be proactive and shocked into it. Especially the younger generation has been exposed to so much violence through streaming apps and YouTube and all the platforms they're on, that sometimes it takes kind of an element of shock to get them engaged into the conversation, which is probably very regrettable, but it's the world we live in. And I will say, as a survivor, for me, I honestly thought somebody's telling the story. The absurdity of going day to day, covering up the injuries, pretending that everything is fine, presenting yourself to the world as, this perfect family or great relationship, when the, chaos is looming behind closed doors, and kind of this paradox that you live in. So I kind of had a different take on it.
Yeah, I found the film very striking, and I viewed it several times just to absorb it. And what really strikes me is that it captures really well the idea that it's very normal. It's just a part of someone's day. And it also very subtly, not so subtly, it works in all the things that a person who suffers from interpersonal violence, what they deal with. Marks on the face or marks on the neck, crying from the night before, things like that. And it occurs to me that it's almost like on one hand, there's the face issue. I mean, literally face, like shame, right? The shame of being in a relationship like this. And I also want to, at some point, we should talk about why people don't speak up and all the things that are really, really challenging for survivors. But it also strikes me, it's almost like a form of self-care or self-soothing, to actually make up your face to find some sort of normality in a really extreme situation. So I thought that was really powerful in the film. But I also, as a PSA, I really 100% agree with what Derek and Veronica are saying. I also come from a trauma-informed lens, and even just the slogan "Step Up" is a little problematic for me. It doesn't work for me because it seems to put the onus on the survivor as if they're doing something wrong or they're not doing enough. And we really, really need to come to them with a lens of compassion and really understand what they're going through and what they need in terms of support to get help, to get support.
I agree with what everything was said. Personally, like when I first watched the film, I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be like kind of comical in a way, if that makes sense. Like making fun of like beauty influencers, kind of like doing their makeup routine. That's kind of like what I got, because like the TikTok, like this is what I do every day in the life. I kind of like got that kind of vibe from it at first. And I was like, I don't know whether I'm like supposed to be like kind of like chuckling out of like uncomfortableness, or like, kind of like I was off put a little bit by like the initial, like, this is my day in my life. Like, I did not expect that that's what the PSA would be about. But I did think that like also going back to like Veronica's point about like my generation and like how people only literally respond to like something like violently shocking that they see, and that's what like sparks change, and that's what drives like motivation to start these conversations. For example, like at USC, like the Sigma News situation, where the fraternity president had 7 accounts of roofie and attempted sexual assault. Like all those conversations did not start until that news dropped. And until stuff was taken away from people who meaning stuff like parties and important college things were taken away from people that like didn't even, commit an act of sexual violence. And that's where the rage came from. So like, I see how like the shock factor is kind of like needed in a PSA in order to like get my like Gen Z and like the generation below me kind of more like riled up about the situation and about like the social justice issue that is being discussed.
Yes, thank you all so much for those insights. I think we really dive deep into both the positives and the negatives about this, and both of them definitely exist. I want to go a little bit deeper into what some of the main factors are that prevent a survivor of domestic violence from coming forward. I was hoping maybe, Veronica, we could start with you and you could just explain a few of these factors.
Oh, there's so many factors. And Regina did allude to them, and the shame and the stigma. Nobody wants to be labeled as this. And I also think that it's really grossly underestimated the lack of self-identification of being a victim to begin with. When it is so normalized, and especially if it's generational, So it's normalized, it's diminished, there's gaslighting involved. And so you just get to where this is just what it's like. And I think that's one of the lines that I really caught from that PSA is, hey, marriages have ups and downs. Like, and I agree with Sophie. I originally did see it as, this is so flippin' absurd. And I did think it was almost a parody on the influencers and TikTok. And I actually loved that part of it because it kind of bashed both. But that being said, I think that is a huge thing. It's just that it's been diminished, it's been normalized. They do not self-identify. And not only do they not self-identify as being a victim, but by all means, they do not want their partner to be labeled as an abuser. So that those two components are really, really important. If there's children involved, there is not a parent on the planet that wants Child Protective Services to get involved. And so they are hiding that because they're afraid of kind of the institutional influence that's going to come in, grab the children, and there's all sorts of fears that go to that. And then lastly, although, I mean, I can go on for days, we also, I think, underestimate that the number one barrier, as far as I'm concerned, and what we see within our clients, is love. There is fear, there's financial, we've got spiritual harm, we have a lot of things going on. But at the end of the day, they love this partner and they are not looking to end the relationship. They're looking for the abuse to stop. Quite the contrary, they want to save this relationship and they want to save the family. And so because of that, to just even step foot into a domestic violence agency or to make that phone call, they're going to have to admit something that they are not want to do. It's a huge first step, and it's a tremendous step, and it takes a lot of courage.
Absolutely. And I think to build off of that, I mean, we've seen that this film is made by a Chinese company. It was Chinese filmmakers. And so it's clear that conservative family values and cultural norms can play a huge role in domestic violence reporting. So what can we do to counter these social and cultural norms to help survivors come forward? Regina, I was hoping that you might talk about this a little bit because of your academic expertise on Chinese culture. And then we can just kind of go through, because it's not just Chinese culture that's affected by this. It's a lot of different conservative values that play a big role.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right that conservative family values and cultural norms play a huge role in this. In Chinese culture, even today, there are really set gendered roles. And typically, again, in straight heterosexual relationships, men hold a lot of power. They're expected to be in charge. They're supposed to have power, and women are expected to obey is a bit of a strong word, but that's actually basically what it is. Women are also expected to take care of the family harmony within the family. And again, that goes to the face thing, like they're presenting a face to the outside world because they don't want to lose face, not for themselves and also for their whole family, not just their nuclear family, but for the extended family as well, which is very common in collectivistic cultures. Yeah, basically the rigid gender roles, toxic patriarchal norms, you know, all that stuff. It's very, very much in play here.
And what are some of the things that we can do to help survivors almost like counter these norms in a way? Derek, you have also a lot of expertise here, so I was hoping maybe you might be able to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we can do is really empower people to make the choices that they want to make, right? I think to say that, again, like Regina had mentioned before, right? To say, oh, you need to step up is a little victim blaming, right? So I think instead, it really is about empowering people and survivors into doing what is safe for them and what they feel like is good for them, right? We recognize that sexual violence involves taking the agency away from people, right? And so I think that by providing that agency, right, providing them with the resources and letting them choose is a really great way to kind of counter those type of norms of, keeping quiet and, showing face and not really speaking up, right? So yeah.
Okay, and I want to start kind of going into the different populations that might be affected by these issues. So first of all, domestic violence is not an issue unique to women. I was wondering if some of you could chime in and share your knowledge about how these issues affect people of all genders.
I can start. So violence, interpersonal violence is not just physical violence, it's also psychological violence, emotional violence, and sexual violence. And unfortunately, the stats are actually really high for for people who don't identify as female necessarily. So according to the CDC, about 1 in 3 men experience sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and most of these partners identify as female. Trans and non-binary folks, the rates of IPV go up, way up. So lifetime prevalence of physical IPV was 37.5% compared to straight folks. Lifetime sexual IPV was 25%. That's 1 in 4 trans or non-binary folks. So the rates are really high. IPV affects everyone, not just women.
Absolutely. And I recently learned that many undocumented survivors don't come forward because they fear deportation. So Veronica, I was wondering if you might explain the role of education in helping these folks.
Yeah, I think all roads actually, and of course I'm completely biased on this, but I think all roads lead back to education. The more I love that we're having this conversation and that Derek is active on these various campuses that he's worked with, and because the conversation and the dialogue, and Sophie was saying the same thing, they tend to be event-based and they need to be a conversation 365 days a year. So when it comes to undocumented, yeah, that will be something that the abusive partner is going to dangle over their head. If you speak up, if you ask for help, if you tell anyone, then I'll report you to ICE. And they have no idea that VAWA exists. They don't know that there's legal protections in place. And I don't want to just throw that around because it's not an easy road. And it's not a guarantee either. So that's something that we have to bring that education when we start talking about this, that then, at Laura's house, we are non-discriminatory, whether it's gender or status, that we will help anybody who is documented, undocumented. We do not ask for that citizen status. And I think the majority of the organizations, matter of fact, I know that the majority of the organizations that we work with are the exact same. And then if they want to seek documentation, then we help them and we give them the resources so they can go ahead and start that process. Now, I can't speak for all counties, but I will speak for, of who I have talked to within Orange County. And they have said, whether it's human trafficking and even these DV cases, that they're not top on their list to deport them. But that is something that really has to be discussed and has to get out there, because it is a huge barrier. I mean, that is huge to think that you're going to go back to a country where maybe you don't know anyone or you were fleeing and all of that. So you're kind of jumping from the frying pan to the fire. I mean, it's just the lesser of the evils, and there are so many more options out there, obviously.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing and for the work that you do in that area and for what Laura's house does. I think it might be a good idea to now talk to Sophie. You are so incredibly brave for not only sharing your story, but deciding that you were going to help others as well. So can you talk a little bit about what gave you the courage to tell your parents what happened, and how did that lead to creating A Path to Courage and your own documentary film, Awake?
So sorry, it's kind of a long story, but I guess what kind of gave me this courage to tell my parents is the fact that I like got out of an abusive relationship. And being able to get on the other side of that and like really like yearning for like my family's like love and support when I didn't have it and they didn't because they didn't know what was going on. I was dating an active addict, so it was a little difficult to be able to actually like leave the relationship. And I was like 14 or 15, so I had no resources. And I went to more or less like a small all girls high school, and I thought that, you know, being in a community in Los Angeles of, you know, our kind of, it wasn't a religious school. The religion was women empowerment is what they like to say. And I thought that it would have been a more inclusive environment to talk about like sexual assault awareness and domestic violence awareness, or even just like that kind of interpersonal violence versus just simply our diversity days being about like racial identities and the differences in them, because there's so many different categories of diversity. Like, and I believe that survivors needed to be included in that conversation. And through that, I also like going through telling my parents, I was reported to LAPD, and LAPD showed up at my high school. And I was taking a midterm. So the head of school and my school therapist kind of pulled me out of the room in front of everyone. And I realized that I had to start becoming like really comfortable with what happened, saying why I was talking to LAPD, because there was a bunch of rumors going around about me being assumed that I was getting arrested for drug possession because I dated an active addict. And so really I just got comfortable by saying what happened to me through my like domestic violence case and my sexual assault case, kind of just by having to defend my own name and defend myself, which is honestly a really crappy way to come to terms with what happened to you. But at the same time, I realized that like when I did start speaking up and when I did become like comfortable and become a voice within like my community for those who have struggled against sexual assault or domestic violence and have been like silenced by that, I tried to like incorporate the conversation into my high school. And, you know, then COVID happened. So I kind of like decided to start a Path to Courage as mainly just an online space for those during COVID who are struggling with things that like me as a survivor were struggling about. And not everyone is very comfortable with kind of just recording what they're going through and like just like talking about it very honestly and not edited. But that was kind of like the angle that I really wanted to take, was just to like sit down and be like, this is what I'm going through and this is what I'm struggling with. And I got a lot of like positive feedback and realized that like not only am I not alone, but like it made people going through also what I was going through like not feel as alone either. And also like the transition from like high school to college, going from an all-girls school to like a campus like USC, and how like that's really difficult for like a sexual assault survivor who came from an all-girls school for like 7 years. That adjustment period was a little difficult. And I also realized again, like I wasn't the only one struggling with that adjustment period who's gone through like domestic or sexual abuse. And more just like the resources that weren't there. Like I've realized that like we need to like start like adding resources to campuses that are more accessible for students who can just be like, hey, I'm struggling right now. And not necessarily have to turn into like a police report. Because that's kind of like the angle that at least this university has taken, which is unfortunate, with all like everyone being a mandated reporter. So I feel like there should be more like confidential advocates versus mandatorily reported advocates. So it'll be more inclusive and more comfortable for students to be able to like report if they're in a domestic abusive relationship, or if they, you know, experienced a sexual assault at a fraternity party. So yeah, that's kind of how all of that happened. And the film Awake was just like started by one of my friends had an idea, and I rolled with it, and she asked me to narrate it. So I did. And then off a whim, we like, we submitted it to my high school's like National Film Festival, and then it got picked, but we didn't think it would be. And yeah, that's kind of how like a Path to Courage started, all because of just like a silly little, oh, I'll tell my story on a microphone and submit it somewhere and see what happens. And it's been a great impact so far, and especially within the USC community. After all of the Greek life scandals, like my organization has been kind of the only one that's been actively like still presenting in all of the fraternities. So I hold my own chapter meetings for like consent laws in California, how to, interfere in a situation of, men that aren't really super like confrontational to their own friends, and how to like stand up for people that you don't necessarily know, but even though it's your friend who's making someone else look uncomfortable. So sort of just those like niche things that I felt like RSVP didn't necessarily like can't cover in like a, education based module, like on a computer, more like a interactive sort of presentation.
Thank you so much for sharing and for everything that you're doing. I was in a sorority during undergrad, and I've seen how much USC has improved in this area. And when I was a freshman, that I didn't know a single thing about any resource. And now we've definitely come a long way. There's still a long way to go, but I'm proud that people like you are kind of making those steps that are necessary to make our school a more safe place, especially the Greek community, but just in general for anyone who needs it. So I wanted to move on a little bit more into therapy. So Regina, your IFS practice centers on trauma-informed therapy that places a lot of emphasis on yoga, meditation, and healthy lifestyle choices. So when it comes to addressing the trauma of domestic violence, what is it about the holistic approach that you have found to be so effective?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good question. And also to Sophie, I just want to salute you. So courageous and amazing, the work that you're doing. Yeah, it just blows me away. And it must be so rewarding as well. So in terms of therapy and how we work with trauma, and this applies to all trauma, not just necessarily trauma from IPV, but trauma's stored in our system. So when I say system, I mean physically, emotionally, psychologically, in memories, in images, in all different ways. And so the modality that I work from is called internal family systems, IFS. We work with all of that. In a nutshell, we understand that the psyche is multiple. So oftentimes when we first introduce this idea, people are like, are you saying I have multiple personalities, disorder? And we're like, actually, yes, that's exactly what we're saying. And we're saying that's a normal state of the human psyche. We all have multiplicity within our psyche, which means that we have parts of us that hold, there are parts of us that hold the trauma. There are parts of us that help us manage the trauma. And then we also have what we call self, which is who we actually are as human beings, which is characterized by compassion and clarity and courage and confidence and all these different qualities. And so the way that we work with trauma is we work with the body, we work with what is here in the present. And IFS is one of the best modalities I know of that works with trauma, that actually heals it, that doesn't just band-aid over the symptoms, but that we actually go in a very respectful, very compassionate way to actually gently uncover, and we call it unburdening the parts of us that hold the pain from those times. So yoga and meditation and energy healing are kind of other modalities that can be incorporated into therapy, but it's not therapy per se. But yoga is so amazing because, again, mind-body connection. For a long time, I taught trauma-informed yoga for survivors. And it was a very, very powerful thing for people to actually get in touch with their body again, because oftentimes there's a disconnect. Disassociation is a very powerful survival mechanism for a lot of people. And to be back in the body is really, really healing when it's done very carefully and gently. Meditation, same thing. Mindfulness, being able to really be with our own experience, but in a very compassionate way. So all of these tools are really, really important for healing.
Thank you. And to build off of that, on average, even if they do come forward, a survivor of domestic violence returns to their abuser, I think about 7 times before permanently leaving. And so I think therapy probably plays a big role in this, but what are some other ways that we can mitigate this phenomenon? And Veronica, I was hoping you could start off with this.
Yeah, leaving or breaking up isn't the problem. It's returning that is the problem. And yes, it does take on average 6 to 7 times. And so I think if there's a circle of support around the individual, the reason why they are returning predominantly is lack of resources. And they have been so torn down in this relationship. They doubt their decision-making skills. They are absolutely been victimized by gaslighting. They're blowing it out of proportion. It wasn't that bad. You're equally as bad. It's not easy living with you. All of these messages. So when they do leave, their phone blows up. And, you know, either they're going to be love bomb. I love you. I'll get help. I'll get sober. We'll do couples therapy. I'll do individual therapy. All the promises, and that will lure them back in. And that's where hopefully, and Sophie alluded to this, is that because so many really kind of suffer in the dark, you know, her family didn't know she was in this relationship. But hopefully, if families do know this, they will be the ones who surround them with the love and compassion. And this is so counterintuitive, but do not tell them what to do. We want to tell them, don't go back. You're better than this. You can do so much better. And why are you crying? They're not worth the tears. And we really have to enter in with empathy and understand that they love this person and give them back their power. I think one of the I don't want to say, one of the tools that I was given that I actually had to help someone personally, help them with an exit. And it was in a different location, and the flip-flopping that was going back and forth and just putting it back on them. It's totally up to you because you have to live with the outcome. So why don't we unpack both? If you stay, if you leave, and really explore it with them, ask questions, get them to start processing it. And then at the time when they didn't think that they were going to actually exit, said, I totally get it. Let's go ahead and get a safety plan in place. So when you're alone and your support system's not there, are you going to call 911? Are you going to scream loud enough for the neighbors to hear? Are you going to exit through the front door, back door, and getting it very practical? And then kind of that shock value of, oh dear mercy, this is my life. And they exited and they never returned. So it really is helping them navigate it without advising, putting the onus back on them because they have to live with the outcome, but then giving them the tools and these very compassionate reality checks. Okay, so you're going back. So then what would the safety plan look like? When you exit again, then how do you plan on doing that if that happens? And being very practical, and that kind of gets them anchored to, I can't do this again. And they see the cycle. So it really is helping them see that cycle that they're caught in, giving them their power. And then regardless if they leave or stay, continue the support. Don't be disgusted, disappointed, shame them into, I can't believe you're doing this again. Just say, okay, well, how can I support you now? What does that look like now? And just hanging in there. It is, oh my goodness, they are on such a journey, and it is not linear. It is going to be up and down and roller coasters and loops and twirls, and just having that empathy and compassion. And hopefully it won't take those 7 times then.
That is so great and makes so much sense to kind of focus on the logics of making a plan. And this is the reality of the situation, and definitely being with them where they are and supporting them no matter what. It's amazing. And I want to kind of go back a little bit to the USC community. And just say, if members of the USC community here based in LA need help, what are their options and how can they go about it? And I think, Derek, you are the best person to speak to this.
Yeah, so there are many options within the community as well as outside the community. Here at USC, confidential advocates and therapists are available to students at RSVP. They are completely confidential, meaning that they cannot share anything to Title IX or UCPD without the permission of the student. Outside of USC, there's also the Santa Monica Rape Treatment Center by UCLA. They also offer a free car service for people where they can drive them out to the Santa Monica Rape Treatment Center. They are also a confidential resource for people. You don't have to be a UCLA student. And then Regina mentioned Peace Over Violence is a really great resource also within the LA County area. And because this film is a film, for Chinese people, CPAF is also a really great resource in LA. CPAF is the Center for the Pacific Asian Family, and they are the only multilingual, as in like all of the API languages service within the US. So that is a really big barrier that, for example, Asian Americans have, right? Because there's the language barrier, but there's not just one Asian language, there's like 20. So they are a really, really great resource as well.
Thank you so much, Derek. And I just wanted to close with asking our panelists if you have any parting piece of wisdom, advice, or knowledge that you just want to share with our audience. We could just start with Sophie. If you have anything that you want to share, closing out.
I guess the main thing that I always like to close my presentations to the USC community about is that no matter how small the struggle is, even if it's not even relating to sexual or domestic violence, like someone's going through it on this campus near you too, chances are it's just very not talked about. So no one's ever alone with what they're struggling, and there's always a community of people who are honestly struggling as much as you are, and being honest and open about like what you are going through is what allowed me to find the community of support that I needed. So I just like to, say at the end of every single presentation, like no one's alone. And that I always tell the community that I'm always there as a resource for anyone who needs it. And that's kind of it.
So parting words of wisdom. So I just want to say that I think is what's clear from this panel today is that IPV affects people of all identities, all backgrounds, all social economic classes, educational levels. It affects everyone. And as the video exemplified, especially this was within a Chinese cultural context, it's a highly complex issue. So survivors are dealing with cultural and family norms, they're dealing with gender roles and expectations, they're dealing with shame, which is a huge one, economic, financial, immigration considerations, lack of support. Oftentimes survivors are, as Veronica pointed out, they're isolated by their abuser, right? So they don't have support systems, or they're purposely isolated. And also, as Veronica pointed out, love, conflicting feelings. So there are just so many things that survivors are working through. And above all, they really, really need compassion, and they need non-judgment, and they need agency. As Derek and Veronica both pointed out, they need to know that it's their choice, right? And we are here to support them. We're here to listen. We're here to help them think through and plan, safety plan. But above all, it's their choice, and it's on their timeline. And that's really important for people who would support survivors to know. And also, as this PSA might show, cultural humility is also really important. We don't know what cultural contexts they're coming from and how that might play in their situation.
I'm going to just do something really, really practical, because I think Sophie and Regina just highlighted some of the kind of the compassion components and the complexities of the situation. I think everyone should have a domestic violence hotline number in their cell phone. And I mean, look up in your region, because if we have the national one, that's wonderful, but then that's going to be another step. They're going to have to call that just to get a local number. And it took a lot of courage just to make that first phone call. So find out in your local area, the domestic violence shelters have it in your phone. And that way, when somebody discloses, when you see something and you want to help someone, again, don't advise them, just refer them to a local agency, and then sit with them as they make that phone call and be willing to answer those questions. And then also don't overcommit. If you're not going to be able to pick up the phone at 1 a.m. and you told them that you'd be there 24/7, then tell them, hey, listen, I do turn my phone off at night. I'm here for you, but I just want you to know, give the parameters. You're allowed to have boundaries too. And if you decide to occupy this space, self-care. It's a heavy space to occupy. You need to take care of yourself because we need you in this fight. And burnout is a real thing. So take care of yourself and bring education onto your campuses and all the departments. We need to start talking about this and equipping people with really good, healthy relationship skills.
Yeah, I just want to, reiterate everything that Sophie and Regina and Veronica has said. I think they're, again, like empowering the survivor is the most important thing, and making sure that the survivor feels safe and supported. And I think the closing remarks is self-care, like Veronica said, right? This is hard work. And this goes to all of us as well. Like, this is hard work. This is, work that can be very draining, right? So make sure to take care of yourself. You can't help yourself. You can't help others if you don't help yourself, right? So take care of yourself. And yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you. This was an incredible discussion. I know I learned a lot. I hope our audience did too. I want to thank you all again for your work in this field and also for taking time to support this event. Each of you is such an inspiration, and we are so grateful for everything that you do. Audience, if you feel inspired by our panel today, all registrants will be receiving an email with all the resources that you might need. There's also going to be an Instagram story post, so you can download that, share it on your page to raise awareness about relational violence, circulate vital resources, and make survivors feel seen. And if you do that, just tag us at StepUpUSC 2022 on Instagram. The more we work to break the stigma, the more survivors will feel emboldened to come forward. And please be sure to follow and support both Laura's House and A Path to Courage as they continue to do vital work in this field. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us. We are so grateful, me and my team, and we wish you the best day.
Thank you, Anam. This was a wonderful panel. I know a lot of work went behind it, and I feel very privileged to have been a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I agree with what Veronica said. Thank you so much. I'm honored.
Thank you. Likewise, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on this panel.
Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day.